I wasn't expecting him to just walk in, let alone catch me like that, but the second our eyes locked, something shifted and there was no turning back. My name is Olivia. I'm 45, creative director at a chic Tribeca design firm, catering to the kind of clients who summer in the Hamptons and winter in St. Bart's. My job eats up my days, but it feeds something in me, a sense of purpose I don't always find at home. My husband, Mark, he's 50. A shark of a corporate lawyer, always plugged in, always traveling for some merger or acquisition. And when he's actually in our Upper East Side brownstone, he's either dead tired or glued to his phone, scrolling through emails. We've been married nearly 10 years, started like a wildfire, but the flame's barely a flicker now. Not all his fault. Life just has this way of sanding down even the brightest edges, especially when two people just stop trying. This summer, Ethan, Mark's son from his first marriage, moved back in. 23, fresh out of NYU and supposedly finding himself, which translated to crashing on our couch. When Mark suggested it, a way for Ethan to save some crazy New York rent, I didn't think much of it. Barely knew the kid, he'd spent his teens with his mom in Jersey, only saw him on holidays, a gangly teenager who mumbled and avoided eye contact. But when he walked through our front door, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I almost didn't recognize him. The awkward boy was gone, replaced by this confident, broad-shouldered man with a smile that could disarm a bomb, made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Effortless charm. And yeah, I tried not to notice, but it was like trying not to notice the Empire State Building. The day it happened was just another Tuesday. Mark was downtown, closing some deal. I'd come home early from a client meeting in Soho, my head still buzzing with fabric swatches and floor plans. I was in our bedroom, changing out of my power suit, thinking I had the place to myself. Door wasn't locked, hadn't even crossed my mind to lock it. Just as I pulled my silk blouse over my head, the door swung open. Ethan stood there, frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, taking me in. "Oh, sorry," he stammered, spinning around so fast he almost tripped. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a cashmere throw from the chaise, heart hammering against my ribs. "It's fine," I managed, trying for casual, but my voice came out breathy, my face burning. "Thought you were out." He mumbled another apology, vanished down the hall, leaving the door slightly ajar. I just stood there, clutching the throw, replaying the look on his face. It wasn't just shock, it was something else. Something that sent a jolt right through me. That night, lying next to Mark, who was already snoring softly, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at me. And for the first time in years, something stirred inside me, something I thought had been dormant, maybe even dead. After Ethan walked in on me, I told myself it was just a clumsy moment, an innocent mistake we'd both pretend never happened. But something about it stuck, replaying in my head like a broken record. The way his eyes had widened, that split second before he turned, the flush creeping up his neck. For the first day or two, I avoided him. Not on purpose exactly, but I found myself staying late at the office, taking calls in my walk-in closet, anything to create distance. It wasn't like I thought he'd bring it up. Ethan didn't strike me as the confrontational type. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, and yet there was this other part of me, a quiet, insistent voice that felt something else entirely. A flicker of something like thrill. A few days later, the tension cracked, in the most mundane way possible. Late afternoon, I was in the kitchen brewing iced tea. Mark had called, stuck in traffic, surprise, surprise. Ethan walked in from the gym. I heard him before I saw him, the thump of his sneakers on the hardwood floor. He walked into the kitchen, shirtless, a towel slung around his neck, hair damp. I glanced up from the counter, instantly regretted it. Broad shoulders, the line of muscle down his chest. Impossible to ignore. "Hey," he said, casual, grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "Smells good." "Iced tea," I replied, focusing way too hard on pouring it into the pitcher. "Mind if I have some?" "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice even as I handed him a glass. He stood close, too close, as he poured himself a drink. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, the faint scent of gym and something else, something clean and sharp. "About the other day," he started, tone hesitant. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced up at him, fingers tightening around the counter edge. "Ethan, it's fine. Really. I didn't mean to walk in like that," he said, eyes searching mine. I wasn't thinking. "It was an accident," I said quickly, too quickly, wanting to shut it down. But he didn't move, just stood there, gaze lingering on me, making my stomach do a weird flip. "You looked really nice that day," he said softly, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. I froze. Breath caught in my throat. For a second, I was speechless. "Olivia, I'm sorry," he said, shaking his head, stepping back. "I shouldn't have said that." He turned and walked out of the kitchen before I could say a word, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, feeling like I'd just stepped off a curb and almost been hit by a taxi. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, the way he'd said it. Soft, almost reverent, like it wasn't just an apology, but something else. Confession? Compliment? I tossed and turned, Mark oblivious beside me, my mind racing in circles. Next morning, things were almost back to normal. Ethan was back to easygoing, cracking jokes at breakfast, acting like nothing had happened. But I felt it, the subtle shift in the air between us. Stolen glances, the way his hand brushed mine when he reached for the sugar, the ghost of a smile that played on his lips when he thought I wasn't looking. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But that changed one quiet evening. Mark was working late, again. I was curled up on the couch, glass of Pinot Grigio in hand, half watching some rom-com on Netflix. The brownstone was quiet, just the hum of the AC. I thought I was alone until Ethan walked in. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, nodding toward the empty end of the couch. "Of course," I said, voice betraying the nervous flutter in my chest. He sat down, his presence immediately filling the room. For a while, we just watched the movie in silence, only sound the occasional clink of my glass on the marble coffee table. "What's this even about?" he asked, gesturing to the screen. "Just a love story," I said with a shrug. "Nothing special." "Looks intense," he said, leaning back, stretching his arm along the back of the couch. His hand was close, so close I could feel the warmth of it against my shoulder. I nodded, pretending to focus on the screen, but I was hyper-aware of every tiny movement he made. The way his knee brushed mine when he shifted, the slight hitch in his breath when he glanced at me sideways. And then it happened. I don't know who moved first, him or me, but suddenly, our faces were inches apart. My heart hammered in my chest as his eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief, suspended moment, time seemed to stop. "Olivia," he whispered, voice low, thick with something I couldn't quite name. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away. But instead, I leaned in, closing the impossible distance between us. His lips were soft, warm, and the kiss was slow, tentative, like we were both testing the water of something forbidden, something dangerous. My hands trembled as they found their way to his shoulders. His fingers brushed against my jaw, sending shivers down my spine. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, just a stolen, reckless moment, I let myself get lost in it, in him, in the way he made me feel alive, wanted, desired, in a way I hadn't felt in years. But then reality crashed down, hard, and I pulled away, chest heaving, struggling for air. We can't," I whispered, voice shaky. "I know," he said, forehead resting against mine, "but I don't want to stop." Neither did I. After that kiss, everything shifted again. Not a declaration, not a decision, but something unspoken had taken root between us. Ethan and I didn't talk about it the next day or the day after, but the tension hung in the air, thick and charged. Every glance, every word, every room we happened to share. I tried to convince myself it was just a moment of weakness, an impulsive mistake we could quietly bury. But the truth was, I didn't want to forget it. I didn't want to stop feeling the way I had when his lips met mine, when his touch had jolted me awake. The first real test came a few days later. I'd taken a day off work, supposedly to catch up on errands, but really just to escape the office and its relentless demands. When I got back to the brownstone, I found Ethan in the kitchen. He was standing by the stove, flipping through a cookbook, faint music playing from his phone, the air filled with the smell of garlic and herbs. "Cooking something?" I asked, setting my keys on the marble countertop, trying to sound normal. "Dinner," he said with a grin, holding up a bowl of chopped vegetables. "Thought I'd surprise you and Mark tonight. Least I can do, crashing here rent-free." "That's sweet," I said, smiling, despite the way my heart did a little skip. He turned back to the stove, stirring something in a pan, and I couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed, how natural it felt to see him there in my kitchen, like he belonged. "Want a taste?" he asked, holding out a spoon. I stepped closer, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened as I leaned in. The spoon hovered in front of my lips, and when I tasted the food, I was surprised by how good it was. Savory, complex. "Not bad," I said, licking my lips. Ethan's eyes lingered on me for just a beat too long. "Glad you approve," he said, voice softer now. The air in the kitchen felt thick, charged with something neither of us dared to name. I stepped back, breaking the spell. Well, let me know if you need any help. I left the kitchen quickly, but my hands were shaking by the time I reached the living room. Over the next week, these moments became more frequent. Not planned, but not entirely accidental either. The way his hand brushed mine when he passed me a plate at dinner. The way he stood just a little too close when we were doing dishes. The way his gaze lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. And then one night, we crossed another line. Mark had gone to bed early, exhausted from a deposition that had run late. I was sitting on the couch, lost in a novel, the brownstone quiet except for the hum of the AC. I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan appeared in the doorway, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that clung to his chest in a way that made it impossible not to notice. "Can't sleep?" I asked, voice steadier than I felt. "Not really," he said, walking over to the couch. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course not." He sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. For a while, we didn't say anything, and I tried to focus on the book in my hands, but I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze making my skin prickle. "What are you reading?" he asked, breaking the silence. I held up the book so he could see the cover. "Just a mystery, nothing exciting." "Looks good," he said, leaning in slightly to get a closer look. His arm brushed against mine, and I felt my breath hitch. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the book from my hands, setting it on the coffee table. "Ethan," I started, but he silenced me with a look. His hand found mine, fingers warm and steady as they closed around mine. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew I should pull away, but I couldn't. Instead, I let him take my hand, let him draw me closer until our faces were just inches apart, and then he kissed me. This time, it wasn't tentative or hesitant. It was deep and urgent, filled with all the things we hadn't said. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, fingers tangling in his hair. We didn't stop until we heard a noise from upstairs, a faint creak that sent a jolt of panic through both of us. "I should go," he said, voice hushed, pulling back. I nodded, chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. "Good night," I whispered, voice trembling. "Good night," he said, and then he was gone, leaving me alone on the couch, heart racing, mind spinning. The next day, I told myself it had to stop. But as much as I wanted to believe that, I knew it wasn't true. The way Ethan made me feel, the way he looked at me, touched me, it was something I couldn't ignore. The moments between us became bolder after that night. One afternoon, I was in my home office, working on a presentation for a big client, door slightly ajar. I had a conference call in 20 minutes, and I was reviewing notes when Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Working hard?" he asked, voice low. I jumped, turning to look at him. "You scared me." "Sorry," he said with a grin, leaning against the desk. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "It's fine," I said, closing my laptop, trying to regain my composure. "What's up?" "Just wanted to see you," he said, eyes locking onto mine. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Ethan, we can't keep doing this." "Why not?" he asked, stepping closer. "It's not like anyone knows." "That doesn't make it right," I said, voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached out, fingers brushing against my cheek. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out, because I didn't want him to stop. It wasn't long before we found ourselves seeking out more moments like that. Small windows of time when we could be alone together, away from the watchful eyes of the world. In the kitchen late at night, when the rest of the house was asleep. In the backyard garden, where the city noise faded away. In my office, during the middle of the day when I was supposed to be working. Every time, the line between us blurred a little more. And every time, the risk of being caught only made it more thrilling. The more time Ethan and I spent together, the less control I felt I had. Every passing day, the boundary between us grew thinner until it felt almost invisible. What started as fleeting moments, stolen glances, accidental touches, quickly became intentional, deliberate. I stopped telling myself it was a mistake. I stopped pretending it was something I could just walk away from. I knew it was wrong, but the way he made me feel, it was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt alive again, and I didn't want to let that go, no matter the cost. One evening, Mark was called away unexpectedly for an overnight deposition in Jersey City. The moment he walked out the door, the brownstone felt quieter. the air thicker with unspoken tension. Ethan was in the living room, sprawled on the couch, beer in hand. He looked up as I walked in, eyes tracking my every move. "You look nice," he said, tone casual, but his gaze was anything but. "Thanks," I replied, sitting down in the armchair across from him. I was wearing a simple linen dress, something light and breezy for the humid New York evening, but the way he looked at me made it feel like I was wearing nothing at all. For a while, we made small talk, the kind of mundane conversation that would seem perfectly normal to anyone listening in. But beneath it, the tension simmered, unspoken, undeniable. At some point, the conversation just faded, and the only sound in the room was the low hum of the city outside the windows. I glanced at him, and when our eyes met, I knew neither of us was thinking about the weather or the news or any of the other things we'd been pretending to care about. Without a word, he stood and walked over to me. "Olivia," he said softly, voice barely there. I looked up at him, breath hitching in my chest. "We shouldn't." He knelt in front of me, hands resting lightly on my knees. "Tell me to stop," he said, eyes searching mine. I couldn't. His hand slid up my thighs, slow, deliberate. And before I knew it, he was pulling me to my feet. My heart was racing, every nerve in my body alight with anticipation, as he guided me to the couch. That night, we didn't hold back. With Mark gone, the brownstone ours for the night, we gave in completely. The weight of what we were doing eclipsed by the sheer intensity of it. Every kiss, every touch felt electric, like we were breaking through some invisible barrier that had been holding us back. Next morning, I woke up to the sound of traffic filtering through the open window. The brownstone was quiet, and for a moment, I let myself forget everything. Who I was, where I was, what I'd done. But when I turned over and saw Ethan still asleep beside me, reality came crashing back. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded into the kitchen. As I stood there, staring out at the city skyline, coffee mug warming my hands, the weight of my actions settled over me. I knew I should feel guilty, and I did, partially, but more than that, I felt alive. For the first time in years, I felt desired, seen, understood. In a way, Mark hadn't made me feel in a long time, but I also knew this couldn't last. We tried to be careful after that. We tried to limit our encounters to stolen moments, hidden corners. But the thrill of it, the constant risk of discovery, only made it more intoxicating. One afternoon, I was working in my home office, door slightly ajar. I had a Zoom meeting in 15 minutes, and I was frantically finalizing a design proposal when Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Busy?" he asked, voice low. "Always," I replied, glancing up at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you need?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The soft click of the latch sent a shiver down my spine. "Ethan." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, hands on my shoulders, spinning my chair to face him. "You've been avoiding me," he said, tone teasing but firm. "I've been working," I said, voice trembling. "You work too much," he replied, fingers trailing down my arms. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I let him pull me to my feet, his lips crashing against mine with an urgency that made my head spin. The desk rattled as he lifted me onto it, hands sliding up my thighs, my carefully organized papers scattering to the floor. Forgotten. For a moment, I forgot everything. My work, my husband, the life I was supposed to be living. All I could think about was him. Our recklessness almost cost us everything. One evening, just a few weeks later, Mark had gone out for a late dinner with clients, and I thought we had the brownstone to ourselves for hours. Ethan and I were in the kitchen, laughing quietly, sharing a bottle of wine. I don't even remember what we were talking about. It didn't matter. At some point, he leaned in, hand brushing against mine. I looked up at him, and before I knew it, we were kissing, the wine forgotten on the countertop, as he pressed me against the cold stainless steel of the refrigerator. Neither of us heard the front door open. "Olivia!" Mark's voice boomed from the foyer. I pushed Ethan away so fast I almost stumbled, heart hammering, trying to catch my breath. "In here!" I called, voice strained. Ethan stepped back, hands shoved in his pockets, face flushed. Mark walked into the kitchen a moment later, brow furrowed as he took in the scene. "What's going on?" he asked, gaze shifting between us, sharp and suspicious. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile, too bright, too fake. "We were just catching up." Mark didn't look convinced, but he didn't press it. Instead, he grabbed a glass of water and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with Ethan, the silence in the kitchen deafening. "That was close," I whispered once Mark was out of earshot. "Too close," Ethan agreed, voice low. But even as we stood there, the tension between us unbroken, I knew this wasn't over. The closer we came to being caught, the harder it became to stop. The danger only added fuel to the fire, making every touch, every kiss feel more urgent, more necessary. And yet, deep down, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. I thought I had control of the situation. I told myself I could balance these two worlds, being Mark's wife and whatever it was that Ethan and I had become. I told myself I could keep it from spiraling out of control. But the truth was, the more time I spent with Ethan, the harder it became to reconcile what we were doing with the life I'd built. I could feel the walls closing in, the guilt gnawing at me every time Mark looked at me with even a flicker of affection. And yet, when I was with Ethan, none of that mattered. One evening, a few days after the kitchen near miss, I found myself alone in the backyard garden. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, and the humid city air hung heavy around me. I had a glass of wine in my hand, the kind of quiet moment I usually craved. But tonight, my mind was anything but quiet. I didn't hear Ethan come outside until he was right behind me. "You okay?" he asked, voice soft. I turned to face him, heart fluttering at the sight of him. He was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans, hair slightly tousled, and he looked so effortlessly handsome it almost hurt to look at him. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed the lie. "You don't look fine," he said, stepping closer. "You've been distant." I let out a shaky laugh, taking a sip of wine to steady myself. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? That this is easy for me? That I don't feel like I'm losing my mind?" His brow furrowed, and he reached out, hand brushing against mine. "Olivia." "No," I said, pulling away, turning my back to him, setting my glass down hard on the wrought iron table. "You don't get to make this sound simple. It's not simple. It's messy and complicated and wrong." "But it doesn't feel wrong," he interrupted, voice firm. I stared at him, chest tightening. "It should," I whispered. "But it doesn't," he said, stepping closer, closing the space between us. "Not when I'm with you." The sincerity in his voice broke something inside me. I turned away, tears stinging my eyes. "Ethan, whatever this is, it can't keep happening." "Why not?" he asked, tone desperate now. "Because I can't live like this," I said, voice cracking. "I can't keep pretending that everything's fine, that I'm fine, I'm not." He was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Do you regret it?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unrelenting. I thought about it, about the nights we'd spent together, the way he made me feel, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. "No," I admitted, voice trembling. "I don't regret it." He took a step closer, hand reaching out to cup my face. "Then why are you trying so hard to push me away?" "Because it's going to destroy us," I said, tears finally spilling over. Later that night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, Mark sleeping soundly beside me. I felt trapped, caught between the life I was supposed to have and the life I suddenly desperately wanted. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the desire. I thought about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at me earlier, the way his voice had trembled when he asked if I regretted it. I didn't, and that terrified me more than anything else. Next day, I tried to distance myself from Ethan. I avoided being alone with him, threw myself into work, and spent as little time at home as possible. But it didn't matter how far I ran. He was always there, in the back of my mind, a constant, irresistible pull. It all came to a head one evening when Mark was working late again. I was in the living room going over some paperwork when Ethan walked in. "We need to talk," he said, tone serious. I looked up at him, chest tightening. "Ethan, you can't keep avoiding me," he said, cutting me off. "You think I don't see what you're doing? You're trying to run from this, from us, but it's not working." "I'm trying to protect us," I said, voice rising. "From what?" he demanded. "From feeling something real for once? From being happy? From ruining everything?" I snapped, standing up, pushing the paperwork away. "Ethan, this isn't a fairy tale. This is real life, and real life has consequences." "What about what I feel?" he asked, voice breaking. "What about what you feel? Are you just going to ignore it? Pretend it doesn't matter?" I stared at him, heart pounding. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I want you? That I think about you every second of every day? That I can't stop?" "Yes," he said, voice firm, unwavering. "Because it's the truth." Tears filled my eyes, and I shook my head. "It doesn't matter. Wanting something doesn't make it right. But it doesn't make it wrong either, he said, stepping closer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, charged with everything we couldn't or wouldn't say. Then, slowly, he reached out, hand brushing against mine. "Tell me you don't feel the same way," he whispered. "Tell me, and I'll walk away." I couldn't. Instead, I let him pull me into his arms, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was equal parts desperate and tender. For a moment, the world fell away, and all that mattered was him. When it was over, we sat together on the couch, the silence between us filled with unspoken words. "I don't know what to do," I admitted finally, voice trembling. "We'll figure it out," he said, his hand closing over mine. His confidence should have comforted me, but instead, it filled me with dread. Because deep down, I knew the truth. We were walking a dangerous line, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could live with this level of deceit. Before Ethan, I'd always believed I was strong, disciplined, unwavering in my commitments. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I realized that the person I thought I was, the version of me that Mark had married, was someone I'd long since left behind. The worst part? I didn't feel like I'd lost myself. I felt like I'd found something I didn't even know I was missing. A few nights after that conversation in the garden, I stood at the bathroom sink, brushing my hair, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Mark was in the bedroom, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I looked at myself, trying to see the woman I used to be, the wife who loved her husband, the stepmother who never crossed a line. But all I could see was the way Ethan looked at me, the way he touched me, the way he made me feel like I was the center of the universe. The woman in the mirror wasn't conflicted, she wasn't filled with guilt or shame. She was selfish, and she knew it. It wasn't long before the cracks in my carefully constructed facade started to show. Mark began asking more questions. "You've been distracted lately," he said one morning over coffee, brow furrowed. "Work. It's been stressful," I replied, keeping my tone light, too light. He nodded, but I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. The truth was, Mark wasn't stupid. He was a lawyer, after all, trained to notice inconsistencies, to pick apart stories, to find the lies hidden in plain sight. And while he might not have known exactly what was going on, I could tell he sensed that something wasn't right. One evening, I was in my office, pretending to work on a project for a client. The brownstone was quiet, Mark having gone to bed early after a brutal day at the firm. Ethan knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. "You're up late," he said, closing the door behind him. "I could say the same about you," I replied, heart racing as he walked over to my desk. He leaned against the edge, hands resting on the polished mahogany. "I wanted to see you." "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "I don't want to play this game anymore," he said, voice low, intense. "I can't keep pretending like I don't want you every second of every day." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I looked away, hands trembling in my lap. "You don't understand how complicated this is," I said softly. "I do," he said, reaching out to lift my chin so I'd meet his gaze. "But I don't care. I want you, Olivia, no matter what." I closed my eyes, chest tightening. "It's not that simple." "It could be," he said, voice steady, unwavering, "if you'd let it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mind racing with everything Ethan had said. I thought about what it would mean to leave Mark, to walk away from the life I'd built, to start over. The idea terrified me, but the thought of losing Ethan terrified me even more. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Mark had gone out to run errands, leaving Ethan and me alone in the brownstone. I was in the kitchen, tidying up, when Ethan walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the counter, watching me. "What is it?" I asked, turning to face him, suddenly uneasy. "I can't keep doing this," he said finally, voice quiet but firm. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with this, with hiding how I feel," he said, stepping closer. "Ethan, we don't have a choice," I said, voice trembling. "Yes, we do," he said, eyes locking onto mine. "You just have to decide what you want." I stared at him, heart pounding in my chest. "You're asking me to choose between you and my husband?" "I'm asking you to choose what makes you happy," he said, "because I can't keep living like this, wondering if every moment with you will be our last." Tears filled my eyes, and I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Ethan, this isn't just about us. There are consequences to what we're doing, consequences we can't ignore. I don't care about the consequences, he said, voice breaking. I care about you. After he left the kitchen, I stood there for what felt like hours, replaying his words over and over in my mind. I knew he was right about everything. I couldn't keep living in limbo, torn between the life I'd built with Mark and the life I desperately wanted with Ethan. But no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't bring myself to make a decision. That night, I found myself sitting in my office, staring at a blank document on my laptop. And then I began to type, the words spilling out of me like a confession. It started with something so small, an accident really, but it changed everything. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't mean to fall for him, but once I did, there was no going back. I poured everything into that document. Every emotion, every thought, every stolen moment that had brought me to this point. It was raw and honest and messy. And when I finished, I sat back and stared at the words on the screen, my hands trembling. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I had the strength to leave Mark, to start over with Ethan, to face the fallout of everything we'd done. But I knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, I couldn't go back to the way things were. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally ready to face it.